Indigenous Australians are members of groups that existed in Australia and the surrounding islands prior to European colonisation. The term is therefore somewhat broad in scope, including such ethnically diverse groups as Tiwi people, Noongar people, and Torres Strait Islanders. Ing does not generally imply a close relationship or common origin of all included groups. The relationship between modern Indigenous Australians and Australia's earliest inhabitants remains a matter of scholarly debate. The earliest definite human remains found to date in Australia are those of Mungo Man, which have been dated at about 40,000 years old, but comparison of the mitochondrial DNA with that of ancient and modern Aborigines indicates that Mungo Man is unrelated to any modern Indigenous Australians. The time of arrival of humans in Australia is also a matter of debate among researchers, with estimates dating back as far as 125,000 years ago. Recent findings indicate that Indigenous Australians are probably descendants of the first modern humans to migrate out of Africa to Asia, roughly 70,000 years ago, arriving in Australia around 50,000 years ago. The Torres Strait Islanders are indigenous to the Torres Strait Islands, which are at the northernmost tip of Queensland near Papua New Guinea. The term Aboriginal is traditionally applied to only the indigenous inhabitants of mainland Australia and Tasmania, along with some of the adjacent islands, i.e., the First Peoples. Indigenous Australians is an inclusive term used when referring to both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. There is great diversity among different Indigenous communities and societies in Australia, each with its own unique mixture of cultures, customs and languages. In present-day Australia, these groups are further divided into local communities. At the time of initial European settlement, over 250 languages were spoken. It is currently estimated that 120 to 145 of these remain in use, and all but 13 are considered to be endangered. Aboriginal people today mostly speak English, with Aboriginal phrases and words being added to create Australian Aboriginal English. The population of Indigenous Australians at the time of permanent European settlement has been estimated at between 318,000 and 1 million, with the distribution being similar to that of the current Australian population, with the majority living in the southeast, centred along the Murray River. Since 1995, the Australian Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Islander flag have been among the official flags of Australia. Indigenous Australia terminology. Though Indigenous Australians are seen as being broadly related as part of what has been called the Australoid race, there are significant differences in social, cultural and linguistic customs between the various Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups. The word Aboriginal has been in the English language since at least the 16th century, to mean first or earliest known indigenous. It comes from the Latin word aborigines, derived from Aborigo. The word was used in Australia to describe its indigenous peoples as early as 1789. It soon became capitalised and employed as the common name to refer to all Indigenous Australians. Strictly speaking, Aborigine is the noun and Aboriginal the adjectival form. However, the latter is often also employed as a noun. Use of either Aborigine or Aboriginal to refer to individuals has acquired negative connotations in some sectors of the community, and it is generally regarded as insensitive and even offensive. The more acceptable and correct expression is Aboriginal Australians or Aboriginal people. The term Indigenous Australians, which also includes Torres Strait Islander peoples, has found increasing acceptance, particularly since the 1980s. Regional groups. The broad term Aboriginal Australians includes many regional groups that often identify under names from local Indigenous languages. These include Koori in New South Wales and Victoria, Ngunnawal in the Australian Capital Territory and surrounding areas of New South Wales, Goori in southeast Queensland and some parts of northern New South Wales, Murdi in southwestern central Queensland, Murray in other parts of Queensland where specific collective names are not used, Noongar in southern Western Australia, Yamatji in central Western Australia, Wongai in the Western Australian goldfields, Nunga in southern South Australia, Anangu in northern South Australia, and neighbouring parts of Western Australia and Northern Territory, Yappa in western central Northern Territory, Yolmu in eastern Arnhem Land, Bininj in western Arnhem Land, Tiwi on Tiwi Islands off Arnhem Land, Anandalyakwa on Groote Eylandt off Arnhem Land, Palawa in Tasmania. These larger groups may be further subdivided. For example, Anangu recognizes localized subdivisions such as Pitjant Jajara, Yankunith Jajara, Garnyajara, Luraja and Antikirinya. It is estimated that, prior to the arrival of British settlers, the population of Indigenous Australians was approximately 318,000–750,000 across the continent. Torres Strait Islanders. The Torres Strait Islanders possess a heritage and cultural history distinct from Aboriginal traditions. The Eastern Torres Strait Islanders in particular are related to the Papuan peoples of New Guinea, and speak a Papuan language. Accordingly, they are not generally included under the designation Aboriginal Australians. This has been another factor in the promotion of the more inclusive term, Indigenous Australians. 6% of Indigenous Australians identify themselves fully as Torres Strait Islanders. A further 4% of Indigenous Australians identify themselves as having both Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal heritage. The Torres Strait Islands comprise over 100 islands which were annexed by Queensland in 1879. Many Indigenous organisations incorporate the phrase Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander to highlight the distinctiveness and importance of Torres Strait Islanders in Australia's Indigenous population. Eddie Mabo was from Mare, or Murray Island in the Torres Strait, which the famous Mabo decision of 1992 involved. Black. The term blacks has been used to refer to Indigenous Australians since European settlement. While originally related to skin colour, the term is used today to indicate Aboriginal heritage or culture in general and refers to people of any skin pigmentation. In the 1970s, many Aboriginal activists, such as Gary Foley, proudly embraced the term black. And writer Kevin Gilbert's groundbreaking book from the time was entitled Living Black. The book included interviews with several members of the Aboriginal community including Robert Jabanunga reflecting on contemporary Aboriginal culture.